Without further ado, we'll present our next speaker, Kirsten DeMelo, who will bring the highlights of Between Heaven and Earth. Kirsten was born and raised in the USA. She has been actively studying Spiritism since childhood. Currently, she is an active member at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore and has participated in giving talks at the center, as well as at other Spiritist events in the United States. Professionally, she is a registered nurse specialized in critical care and case management. Kirsten.
Truly a hard act to follow. I don't have anyone other than probably one of my obsessors and my guides with me here today. So I want to start out by probably seeing my presentation up here in just a moment. It'd be great. But our topic and our purpose here today is to talk about this particular book, Between Heaven and Earth. And it has so many highlights, but we will attempt to try to bring the most important ones we felt inspired to talk about. And as we walked around today throughout this training center, we realized that everyone here is really here for the same purpose. I mean, even people who are not here for our symposium, they're all here for the same purpose. They're all here to learn something. So the vibration in this particular location is already higher than perhaps and very centered on becoming better, focused. And that's really important in our lives to know where our focus is. I think part of my work was already done by both the Dr. Assissis here for me in realizing that our relationships and communicating is key. And it is a very important topic we're going to discuss and wanted to bring today to you. A quote from the book Boa Nova, which isn't yet in English, but if it were to be translated roughly, we could say be called the good news or good news. And while Jesus was traveling through the desert, going to a particular town, he encountered a couple of Pharisees, as he usually did. And being Jesus, people were staring at him and saw he just had something about him. But one particular Pharisee in particular, Hannah, had the gall to approach him and begin questioning him about things. And, you know, being Jesus, he had nothing but something really positive to say. And he said, you know what? No marble is pure and more beautiful than that of the sentiment. And no chisel is superior to that of goodwill. We bring this very specifically and on purpose because he talks about the education of our sentiments and our feelings. And I think that this topic and this talk couldn't come more appropriately after the Dr. Assissis talks today, because it is about educating our emotions and understanding them. And remember that. If you remember nothing today, think about the image of a chisel chiseling away at our emotions so we can work more and communicate more effectively. Because if I don't have good emotions, if I don't know how to work on them to evolve, what are we doing? So we want to focus because it's important. In the opening of this book, one of the main openings that the mentors bring for us, in particular Clarencio, he says that we are responsible for the direction of our aspirations, good or bad. So when we talk about what is our main goal, let's just say for all intents and purposes we're giving a talk, my main goal today naturally is to be a good vessel from the beyond, but to focus on this particular topic of educating our emotions and understanding, because the tragedies and the stories that Emmanuel tells us in the opening introduction of this particular book, he says, this story is an old story about love and hatred. If anyone has ever read the Old Testament, you can read about King David and the affairs with Bathsheba. So we know that, you know, these dramas have been going on for centuries. It's nothing new. Jerry Springer is nothing but a recapitulation of what has been going on for more than 2,000 years. Jerry, it's nothing new, I'm sorry to tell you. But Clarencio brings something very interesting. I apologize, we're having a new relationship with this thing. Clarencio says the following. He says it's important for us to analyze the choice we make in dealing with any problem or situation, because our thoughts will sail before us to attract and shape our intended purpose. In every area of existence, life gives us what we really ask for. It's true. Whatever I'm intending out to do in my life, try it. It'll happen. It'll manifest before you in whatever form that is specific for you, but it will. So this brings to us first and foremost a sense of responsibility that I have, that we have as a collective. What are the aspirations that we are setting before us? And why we bring this is because in the very beginning of this book, it's very interesting because it starts out with a teenage girl, probably about 14, 15 years old, who had a desire, who had an aspiration. She wanted her family to not be going through the trial and tribulation that they were going through. But before we get into that particular case, we have to understand about how our thoughts are transmitted, how this action of prayer works, because this particular story starts out about how this young girl, how her emotions related and how her relationships with her family changed two families that had been suffering for more than almost a couple of decades because of one girl's faith and power and desire to want to change. So in the Genesis, we learn that, and this is just a basic overview of the action, transmission of thought, and also subsequently prayer, that you have a thought connected with strong willpower. It creates this fluidic current that is established between you and what it is that you're setting out to establish, whatever it may be. Could be a person, could be a goal in life. But that is the basic overall mechanism. You can read a little bit more about it in the Genesis. It's not our main highlight. But this would be one of our main highlights of the first part of this book. When this young girl, when she prays fervently to want things to change, because she wants the relationships in her family to change. Why? Well, she found herself in a situation where her mother is deceased, father has remarried, and her little brother has recently drowned and died, leaving the stepmother extremely depressed and the father distraught, and she's by herself and she doesn't know what to do. But luckily for her, her father was a strong Catholic and taught her how to pray. So here she is, we find her praying to her mother, her deceased mother, thinking, well, my mom's dead, so she must be able, in heaven somewhere. This erroneous idea sometimes that we have. And Clarence, who is depicted here on the left-hand side, your left, my right, left-hand side of the screen, where her prayer is actually so strong, and he says, Evelina calls out to her mother's spirit, who is in no position to listen to her, even so her petition isn't lost, uttered at such a high frequency, our little sisters please break through the lower circles and go in search of unfailing support. So what do they say? Her prayer was so strong that it literally cut through all the dense layers from her to them in Nos Solar. And it came to them, they describe it in sort of a form of like a file. So they go naturally, as any good healthcare practitioner, any good therapist, before they go and give the treatment, what do? They have to investigate. So that's what happens. They wound up investigating and they discover the behind the scenes of why she was praying, what's going on. This is what they uncover. There was Odila, who used to be married to a man named Amaro, who had two lovely children, Evelina and Giulio. Well, soon, unfortunately, as life happens, sometimes death comes and snatches away those whom we love the most. And this is, in fact, what happened, leaving Amaro with two children to raise on his own, naturally, because men can't do things like things on their own, right? We need our wives. So what happens, he winds up, if my clicker would go, he winds up remarrying Zumira, who is now his current wife. Unfortunately, for many years since Odila's death, she has not been able to deal with her emotions of letting go of her husband, because she died in the prime, probably in her 30s or 40s, in the prime of her life, and she wasn't able to let go of that. So that's an important key as well, because her emotions, because she wasn't able to deal with it, she actually began obsessing Zumira. But she was only able to access Zumira after many years of waiting for the opportunity, as many obsessors do. They wait for the perfect opportunity where you sort of lower your vibration so they can connect, right? It's kind of like a virtual, it's like a Wi-Fi. You come in here and you click on the AATC and there's no password, you're like, boom, you're in right away. We are like that sometimes for brothers and sisters on the other side of life who aren't that educated yet, who want to cause problems in our lives. We make it that easy for them just to click in. So for Zumira, this easy click in for her was when she became extremely depressed because she felt guilty. Why? Because little Giulio actually wound up drowning because of in part of her negligence, or so she thought. So she thought. So with a little more digging and research, Clarencio, Andrea Luis, and Ilario, which is 3 major characters in this particular book, they find that Zumira also comes with some baggage to the situation, not just Amaro. They find that Zumira, hold on, it's becoming like a soap opera, Zumira was engaged to Mario Silva, but she left Mario Silva to marry Amaro. Oh my goodness, is it Jerry Springer? She left him, so Mario Silva is really upset. He has all this anger and hatred towards him. By the way, Mario Silva is a nurse, and actually during the hospital, while he was at the hospital one day, he met a very nice woman by the name of Antonina, and this is important. We highlight these particular people here because these are all circles of relationships that we come back over and over in many lifetimes, recapitulating the problems that we have yet to conquer, unless we can use, in part, Dr. Rosenberg's, who's great. I've read his literature. He's fantastic in helping us to communicate, nonverbal communication. It's wonderful. Until we really learn how to deal with our emotions and our relationship. Because bottom line, that's what the whole book is about. It is about, in part, dealing with our relationship, because guess what? Either we deal with it now, or we deal with it later. At some point, according to the literature, according to what we learn in Spiritism, we have to face, our issues. Another interesting thing they find is that when they go to Antonina's house, they realize that she's a Spiritist. Very interesting. She actually winds up helping Mario Silva with forgiveness and understanding, letting go of all the past pain that he felt towards Zomira. But when they go to Antonina's house to visit her, and she's doing her gospel at home, they actually see this spirit that's just hanging out in her home. And when they investigated who he was a deceased grandfather of hers. So another interesting point in this very Jerry Springer-like story here, take a mental picture of this, because this is important when we talk about if we don't fix things today, we have to fix them tomorrow. And sometimes the tomorrow is our next life, and circumstances are more worse, or we're forced into circumstances we aren't necessarily wanting to be in. But nonetheless, it helps us. So when Clarencio and Andrea Luis and Eladio go to Zomira's house to investigate even further, because they go for several days trying to find out where is the problem and all the ins and outs before they decide what they're going to do. So they go and they notice a very disturbing scene that even this picture before you doesn't even begin to depict what the actual book says. The book says that they find Odila, who is the discarnate, obsessing Zomira, but they say that, and I quote, Odila has these prong-like projections that come out of her and that attach in the medulla oblongata of Zomira, the incarnate, and also she has another finger-like prongs that attach to her heart chakra. So Andrea Luis is horrified, imagine that, of course, by this scene, and immediately he says, let's disconnect her, let's separate them, and Clarencio says, look, if we do that, you're going to kill Zomira. It's not possible. The best we can do is try to influence Zomira, to raise her vibration, to change her line of thought, and this is extremely important. And he says, this is a very delicate situation. We need to exert our influence on Zomira's thoughts because she's the one who initiated the persecution in the first place. It's crucial to set her will on a different course, shifting her mental center and providing her with other interests and aspirations. This is so important in our lives because when we want others to change or when we are trying to change ourselves, it's difficult, right? It's not easy. But even that is not the problem, because we know it takes work. But the problem is getting the person who's in the difficult situation to want to change. Working in healthcare for a number of years, we know that we work with addicts and people with all different types of addictions across the board or in destructive behavior. And the problem is not, getting them the best possible treatment at Johns Hopkins University. It's there, the treatment is there, there's so many resources, but it's getting the person to want to change. The hardest part of Clarencio, Andrea Luis, Ilaria, and Eulalia, who was a protector spirit, there's 4 spirits there. They're more elevated. They could easily offer support. But what happens? Zomira was not in a state to change. Perhaps she didn't want to change yet. Perhaps she just wasn't in the condition at all to change. So it's a delicate situation. So when we think about this and we talk about compassion, we also have to know that people need time. And something that really pushes us forward when we talk about people need time, and we really shouldn't be worried about what others are doing in the respect that, because guess what? The law states the following, that, or rather, Clarentia states the following, that aside from the power of God, okay, that's like stronger than splitting an atom bomb kind of power. This is like, aside from the power of God, pain is the only force capable of altering the course of our thoughts, compelling us to make indispensable changes with a view to the divine plan for us. Pain is what makes us move our butts and change something in our lives. That's why tragedy is good. That's why in the Spirit's book, when they talk about war being necessary, because sometimes we need that sadness to awaken people. In the book by Joanna de Anjos, After the Storm, she talks about the first chapter entitled Disasters. She says, sometimes disasters are very necessary, of course, because of karmic things as well, but also for all of us who are watching things that happened recently in Boston and throughout the world. Because we step back and say, oh my goodness, what if that were me? What would I do if I lost my loved one? We need to prepare ourselves for that. As spiritists or as non-spiritists, as anybody, we need to prepare ourselves for this. And know and take this comfort also that aside from the power of God, pain will change people eventually. It will change us. An interesting concept. Because then they decided, you know what, we're going to try to even call a higher spirit to come, because 4 wasn't enough. Let's get a 5th one down here, Sister Clara, and they say something very interesting in the book. They say that she has already have complete control over her sentiments, complete. They didn't say she's perfect, but complete control over her sentiments, so much so that it really made Andrea Luis go, really, Clarencio, you have a lot of knowledge. Like, why do you need Sister Claire? Like, seriously? That's not what he said, I'm paraphrasing. But he said, you know what? He said, instruction is one thing. You know, I can come and educate you. But if I myself do not have the capability to conquer my own emotions, that doesn't move people. And that's not me saying that. That's not me saying that. That is Clarencio in this particular book. He says that, and we find it interesting. Clara gives a whole long discussion with Odila. And she says many things, and one thing we're just pointing out because we wanted to give it as a tip for ourselves and for one another. And she says, if we do not rid ourselves of jealousy while we have the opportunity to toil in the dense body, it becomes an afflictive bonfire that consumes our hearts after we die. We may begin the endeavor of love in the home, but we have to extend it to humankind as a whole. Now, this is an extremely difficult concept because for many years, and if anybody's ever studied the book Evolution in Two Worlds, which is bound to come out in English soon, actually, we learned that Andrea Luis in that particular book tells us that through different internships in the animal kingdom for years, and then in the human kingdom, we learn to be a mother and have offspring. So we form this attachment for our young, for our partners in our lives. But we bring this because we should consider and remember that we will die one day, and that what will I feel on the other side when I see my partner here with my children? How will I feel? How will I deal with those emotions? Because Odila, they say, had a very good marriage with Amaro, who was his first wife. They had a marriage of affinity. So you would think, well, maybe she, was a bad marriage anyway. No, it actually was a really good marriage. But she didn't know how to deal with her emotions. She didn't know how to deal with that loss. Imagine, we think about only the loss that we experience. It's a loss also for them as well. So it's something we should think about in terms of educating our emotions. And for those of you who are thinking, well, what book would I start with? Obviously, we always recommend the Spirit's book and the Codification, but there's a fantastic book by Joanna de Anjos called Existential Conflicts, and there she talks about some of the major feelings: guilt, jealousy, anger, hatred, a number of things that we should really learn how to educate ourselves, just so we don't suffer and have to go through this extensive pain. One of the other things through their research that Clarencio did with Andrea Luis is that they find out about this behind the scenes. they find out there's this story about a woman named Lena Flores, and this all pertains to the initial characters. They come to find out there was once a woman named Lena Flores, married to Jose Esteves. Prepare yourself, this is another Jerry Springer moment. Jose Esteves was married to Lena, and one day Jose brought home two of his friends, Julio and Armando, And then Lena was like, well, Jose, I'm kind of tired of you. I'm gonna get with Julio and dump you. And that's what happened. And then she got tired of Julio, and then she decides to go to Armando. But then Julio gets really depressed, drinks some poison, tries to kill himself, but the poor thing didn't die. He suffered for many years from these lacerations in his throat till finally he threw himself into the river and drowned himself. Very dramatic, but it is what happened according to Andrea Louise. So moving forward, what did Jose Esteves did? He said, you know what? I'm moving out of here. This all happened during the war of Paraguay and Brazil. That's the time frame. He said, you know what? I'm going to relocate. I'm in the war. I could be stationed somewhere else. So he did. He comes across a couple named Lola and Leonardo. And he says to himself, nobody had respect for my marriage. I'm going to go screw up their marriage too. So he winds up stealing Lola from Leonardo, leaving Leonardo extremely depressed and sad. Lola moves with him. Everybody dies in a very deplorable state. End of the story. Very sad state of affairs for these people. But what happens? In Spiritism, we know that we can't just have these actions. We know that the law of cause and effect is always. God's laws are always perfect, unlike us. They are always followed through to the T, to the very last cent is paid off. So the good, noble spirit said, all right, guys, we need to redo this thing here. So what happens? Who is the Lena Flores of today? Zumira, the second wife. Well, who was Armando? Amaro. The very lover who she had before was the very husband who she has today. Recapitulating old ties to rebuild the errors of the past. And what about little Julio as well? Who was he? Well, little Julio actually was the little Julio, her stepson, who she didn't like at all and was negligent and let him drown, was the Julio of the past. By the way, not to confuse you, Julio remains Julio for many lifetimes. So if you're confused and like, why is his name still Julio? I don't know, he just kept that name. So more confusing for us telling the story, but it is a true case. So this family comes back together to learn to love, to learn to forgive, to learn to educate their emotions together. At some point, they got to get it right. And in fact, they actually do. It's a beautiful, beautiful ending. And there's more to it. I'm not telling you all of it because you should go and read the story. But what about the other characters? Who are they? Who's Jose Esteves? All these Portuguese names. Who is he? He used to be married to Lena. How does he all play into this? Well, he is the Mario Silva of today. Remember, Zumira used to be engaged to him, but left him, yet again, to go back to marry Amaro. But in the book, they'd say it's not something negative. She felt this necessity to fix what she had done before. And in this particular life, in her reincarnatory plan, it was with Amaro. So it wasn't done in such a negative way as it was in the past. She really needed to come back and fix her problems. But what about Lola? I won't attempt to pronounce her last name, and Leonardo. What about them? Well, who is Lola? Oh my goodness, brace yourself. She is the renovated spiritist of today. She is. Completely renovated. She actually became, in this life, as Antonina, had 3 children, had her husband abandon her in this life. That's why she winds up getting together with Mario Silva. And throughout the book, we see she has completely renovated herself through the help of Spiritism, and subsequently is also helping Mario Silva renovate himself. So the reincarnatory plan for them is to get married in the current life, and Leonardo of the past, whom they also kind of really created some karmic debts there, comes as their firstborn son because he's one of the ones that's still in the spirit realm suffering after almost 30, 40, 50 years of remaining in the same mindset. So this is us. I mean, we may laugh and we may joke and poke fun at Jerry Springer, but this is us. This is us recapitulating. That's why Emmanuel in the introduction says, this book is an old story of love and hatred. It happens throughout our history, everywhere. So the main highlights we wish to bring from this book, if you haven't already grasped it, is the power that prayer has. Because go back and remember, these two families came together because of one girl's faith. Teenager, imagine. Teenagers of today, I don't know that they would do this. But one girl's faith and strength of this prayer helped. So the power of prayer really does work. If you think, well, I'm praying, nothing's happening because I'm not seeing it before me, try it and wait. Relationships and re-encounters. Thank you, Danielle Assisi and Nicole Temple Assisi, for bringing us this understanding of the need for communication in our relationships. Sometimes we divide those two things because you say, I'm a spiritist and their emotions are over there. No, they're all combined because the problems we're having is with our emotions. We can see all throughout the books of Andrea Louise, these are the issues we are having. Learn to love your emotions and embrace them, but also learn to refine them. As Christ said, that there is no greater chisel than that of goodwill and no greater marble than that of the sentiment. And ultimately, forgiveness. A feeling, a sentiment that sometimes it's hard for us to forgive one another for doing, especially if you can imagine. And this story actually is kind of mild compared to other stories in the Andrea Louise collection. But if we can just mentalize us having that chisel of goodwill, really, we have to want to be different. When you want to progress, when you want to get better, you will. It's the same with addicts. When they want to change, they will. So we know as healthcare practitioners, when an addict wants to get better, he will in his own time. And God is the same with us. When we want to get better, we will. When Judas was getting ready to go and do what he did because he thought he knew more than Jesus, and Jesus didn't stop him, he was the Christ. He said, go on, Judas, go on, do what you need to do. Why? Because Judas saw him as the immortal being, as the immortal soul, because he knew he'll get it eventually. He will. We all will. Well, we can actually expedite our process a little bit more by first desiring to be different, wanting and utilizing that power. Instructor Clarencio says something, it's not too far off what Druso says, because their like minds are more elevated. They said, we owe to ourselves everything that happens to us in terms of good and evil. Everything in my life, every single thing, I played a part in it. And that's a difficult concept for those of us who go through very difficult situations in our lives that are painful, that literally can bring us to our knees. And we don't mean metaphorically, literally can bring us to our knees. But it's meant for reflection. And if we could leave you with one last thing from the Spirit's book and from Joanna de Angelis, Joanna says that we should love ourselves more. Make a plan to love yourself and carry it out, she says. In part 3 of the Spirit's book, they tell us in the law of preservation that it's okay to want to be better. It's okay to work on your well-being, to do things to help yourself in whatever way, as long as you're not harming somebody else. And work on your willpower. These are tips. If it's weak, it's because it's not being exercised, so attempt to correct our bad habits. And last but not least, advice is only valuable if you're willing to act on it. So there's an old story about a wise man and a general, and it says that a general once came to this wise man, very angry, that this wise man was making all of his soldiers leave the war. And the general came screaming and yelling and cussing at him. And after he was done, the wise man said, if someone gives you a gift and you do not accept, whose gift is it? To teach us that if we come here and share this beautiful knowledge, but you don't accept it and use it, which is what Joanna is saying, whose gift is it? What purpose is it serving? I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me today, and I hope this serves as some enlightenment for you all.